There are marriages that look perfect from the outside, marriages that everyone in the neighborhood envies, marriages where the couple holds hands at church and the husband brings flowers on no particular occasion, and the wife smiles like she has the whole world in her pocket. But sometimes, beneath that flawless surface, there is a rot so deep that when it finally breaks open, it destroys everything around it. When 47-year-old Marcus Thompson walked onto the Family Feud stage in April 2025 to celebrate what he believed was 18 years of a beautiful marriage, he had no idea that within the next 30 minutes, his entire life would be ripped apart on national television by the one person in his family who had no idea what she was doing. Steve Harvey, in all his years of hosting, had never seen anything like what was about to happen. Before we dive into this story of shattered trust, devastating betrayal, and a family forced to confront the truth in front of millions, if you believe that honesty is the foundation of every relationship and that secrets always come out eventually, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. What you are about to watch will remind you that the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell the people who love us most. The Family Feud studio was buzzing with celebration that Thursday afternoon. The Thompson family had come to Los Angeles from Atlanta specifically for this taping, and the energy they brought with them was infectious. This was supposed to be a happy occasion, a tribute, a celebration of a marriage that had lasted nearly 2 decades, of a family that had built something beautiful together. The producers had set it up as a special anniversary episode, and everything about the atmosphere suggested joy and togetherness. Marcus Thompson stood at the center of his team with the quiet confidence of a man who had built his life exactly the way he wanted it. At 47, he was a successful architect who had designed some of the most striking buildings in Atlanta. He was broad-shouldered and warm-eyed, the kind of man who made everyone around him feel comfortable. He wore a crisp button-down shirt and a smile that suggested he was exactly where he wanted to be. Beside him stood his wife of 18 years, Linda Thompson. At 44, she was striking in the way of women who have maintained themselves carefully over the years, poised and polished with the practiced ease of someone who had spent nearly 2 decades as the wife of a successful man. She wore a fitted dress and a smile that, to anyone who did not know her well, looked warm and genuine. But to the people who did know her, there was something tight about it, something held back, like a smile being maintained through effort rather than felt naturally. Their 2 daughters completed the family picture. Kayla was 17, dark-haired and observant, with the quiet intensity of someone who had been watching the adults around her more carefully than they realized. Alyssa was 15, brighter and more open, with the easy laugh and quick speech of a teenager who had not yet learned to filter what came out of her mouth. And completing the team was Marcus's mother, Ruth Thompson, 68 years old, with silver hair and sharp eyes that had seen enough of life to know when something was not right, even when she could not quite name what it was. On the other side of the stage stood the Petersons, a large family from Dallas, loud and funny and ready to play. They were the perfect foil for the Thompsons, unguarded and chaotic in the way that made great television. Steve Harvey loved them immediately. Steve walked onto the stage with his trademark energy, shaking hands, asking names, working the room the way he had done for decades. He stopped in front of Marcus and Linda with a wide grin. Marcus and Linda Thompson, 18 years of marriage. How does it feel? Marcus put his arm around his wife and pulled her close. It feels like I am the luckiest man alive, Steve. 18 years and I still feel the same way I did on our wedding day. Linda leaned into him and smiled. He is a good man, the best man I have ever known. The audience cheered. Steve clapped his hands together. Well, that is what I like to hear. Family, love, loyalty, that is what Family Feud is all about. He turned to the daughters. And who do we have here? Kayla answered first, measured and polite. I am Kayla. I am 17. Alyssa jumped in before anyone could speak. I am Alyssa. I am 15 and I am so excited to be here. This is literally the best day ever, Steve laughed. I like her energy. Ruth, how long have you been watching these 2 raise a family? Ruth smiled, but it was a careful smile, the smile of a woman who was enjoying the surface of things while keeping something locked away underneath. Long enough to know that marriage is complicated, Mr. Harvey. Long enough to know that what you see is not always what you get. It was an odd thing to say, and for just a moment, something passed between Ruth and Kayla, a look that was too quick for most people to catch. But Steve Harvey had spent decades reading rooms and reading people, and he noticed. He filed it away and moved on to the game. The first round of Family Feud went as expected. Survey questions, shouted answers, the Petersons celebrating every point with theatrical enthusiasm. The Thompsons played well, with Marcus leading confidently and Linda answering with practiced charm. Alyssa was animated and funny, shouting answers before anyone else could speak. Kayla played quietly, watching everything, contributing when called upon but spending most of her time observing. Ruth sat at the end of the line with her arms folded, occasionally glancing at Linda, with an expression that she quickly smoothed over whenever anyone looked her way. Then came the question that changed everything. It appeared on the board behind Steve Harvey in bold letters, a survey question that had been answered by 100 people. The question read, "Things your spouse does that they think you do not know about." The studio laughed. It was a light question, the kind designed to get funny answers. Secret shopping trips, eating the last of the leftovers, watching guilty pleasure television shows. Harmless, entertaining, the kind of thing that made good television without any real stakes. Steve turned to Marcus. "All right, Marcus, you are up first. What do you think is something your wife does that she thinks you do not know about?" Marcus laughed and shook his head. "Steve, I have been married to this woman for 18 years. I know everything she does, but if I had to guess, I would say she buys shoes and hides them in the back of the closet." The audience laughed. Linda rolled her eyes playfully. "Guilty," she said, and everyone laughed again. Steve nodded, and the survey confirmed it was one of the top answers. Points were awarded. The game continued. Then Steve turned to the Peterson family for their answer, and they gave something funny about secret cookie jars. More laughter, more points. The round moved quickly, light and entertaining, exactly the way it was supposed to go. Then it was the Thompsons' turn again, and Steve pointed to Alyssa. "Alyssa, you are young but you live in this house. What do you think is something one of your parents does that they think nobody knows about?" Alyssa did not hesitate. She had not been thinking about what she was going to say. She had not been weighing consequences or considering the weight of her words. She was 15 years old and she had been asked a question, and her brain simply produced the most obvious answer, the thing she had noticed, the thing that had seemed strange to her, the thing she had mentioned to Kayla once in a whispered conversation that Kayla had immediately shut down. "My mom talks to someone on the phone late at night," Alyssa said, her voice bright and casual. "She waits until Dad goes to sleep and then she goes out to the car in the driveway and sits there for like an hour talking to this guy. She does it like 3 times a week. She thinks we do not know, but I heard her one time when I came downstairs for water." The studio went silent. Not quiet, not a pause, silent. The kind of silence that happens when the air is suddenly sucked out of a room. The Peterson family, who had been in the middle of celebrating, stopped mid-celebration. The audience members who had been laughing froze with their mouths still open. The camera operators shifted instinctively, turning their lenses to Marcus Thompson, because every single person in that room understood exactly what had just happened. Alyssa looked around, confused by the sudden change in atmosphere. She had no idea. She genuinely had no idea what she had just done. Marcus Thompson did not move. He stood perfectly still, his arms still around Linda's shoulders from the earlier moment, his face completely blank. It was the face of a man whose brain had suddenly stopped processing, like a computer that had been given a command it could not execute. He was looking at his wife, and she was not looking back at him. Linda Thompson had gone white, not pale, white. The color had drained from her face so completely that for a moment she looked like she might faint. Her smile, that careful practiced smile, had disappeared entirely. Her hands, which had been clasped in front of her, had started to shake. Steve Harvey had been in the middle of reaching for his cards to check the survey answer. He stopped. He looked at Marcus. He looked at Linda. He looked at Alyssa, who was still smiling, still waiting for the game to continue, still not understanding. Then he looked at Kayla, who was staring at the floor, her jaw tight, her eyes bright with tears that she was fighting to hold back. And he looked at Ruth, who had closed her eyes and whose lips were moving as if in silent prayer. Steve set his cards down on the podium. He did not pick them up again for the rest of that taping. "Hold on," Steve said. His voice was different. The entertainer was gone. What was left was something quieter, something heavier. "Hold on. Everyone hold on for a second." He walked to the center of the stage, positioning himself between the two families. He looked at Marcus, who had finally moved, slowly pulling his arm away from Linda's shoulders as if the contact had suddenly become unbearable. "Marcus," Steve said gently, "I need you to tell me, do you understand what your daughter just said?" Marcus's voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "I heard what she said. And do you want to talk about it, right here, right now?" The studio held its breath. This was the moment when Marcus could have walked off the stage, could have refused to engage, could have taken his family and left and dealt with this privately, away from cameras and audiences and the public eye. That would have been the easier choice, the safer choice. But Marcus Thompson did not look away. He looked at his wife, who still could not meet his eyes, and something in his expression shifted. The shock was giving way to something harder, something colder. "Yeah," Marcus said. "Yeah, I want to talk about it." Steve nodded and gestured to the producers. Chairs were brought onto the stage. The game board was turned off. The Petersons were quietly asked to step aside, and they did so with the somber respect of people who understood that something important was about to happen. Within minutes, the Thompsons were seated in a rough circle on the stage, Marcus and Linda facing each other, Kayla and Alyssa on either side, and Ruth at the end with her arms folded, and her face set in an expression that was equal parts sorrow and vindication. Steve sat down with them, close enough to be part of the conversation but far enough to give it space. "Linda," he said, his voice steady and without judgment. "I am going to ask you a direct question and I need you to give me a direct answer. Is what Alyssa described true? Are you having a secret relationship with someone outside your marriage?" Linda opened her mouth. The first word that came out was no, but it did not land. It hung in the air between them, thin and unconvincing, and every person in that studio knew it was a lie. Marcus knew it. Ruth knew it. Kayla knew it, and the look she gave her mother in that moment was not the look of a child looking at a parent. It was the look of someone who had been carrying a secret that was not hers to carry, and who was relieved, even in the midst of pain, that it was finally out. Linda looked at Kayla, and something broke in her. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, it is true." The word fell into the silence like a stone into water. Marcus did not flinch. He had already known. Some part of him had known the moment Alyssa spoke. Maybe some part of him had known for longer than that, the way people sometimes know things they are not ready to face, storing the knowledge somewhere deep where it cannot hurt them until the moment it can no longer be kept away. "How long?" Marcus asked. His voice was flat, not angry, not emotional. Flat, in the way that only happens when emotion is so large that the only way to contain it is to drain the voice of everything. Linda was crying now. 8 months? 8 months. Marcus repeated the words as if trying to understand their meaning. 8 months. Half a year, 240 days, give or take, of lying. Of sitting at the dinner table and asking how everyone's day was. Of lying beside him in bed at night and then slipping out to the driveway to talk to another man. Of looking at him every single day and knowing what she was doing and choosing to keep doing it. Steve intervened before the silence could become something destructive. "Linda, I need you to understand something about this moment. You are sitting here in front of your husband, your daughters, your mother-in-law, and millions of people who are going to watch this. You cannot spin this. You cannot minimize it. You cannot make excuses. All you can do right now is tell the truth. So tell us the truth, not just what happened, but why." Linda wiped her face with trembling hands. When she spoke, her voice was stripped of all the polish and performance that had defined her for years. What was left was raw and small and desperately sad. "It started because I was lonely," she said. "I know that sounds like an excuse. I know it is an excuse, but it is the truth. Marcus works all the time. He has always worked all the time. He is a brilliant man and he pours everything he has into his work, and there is not much left over for me, for us. I tried to tell him. I tried for years to tell him that I was struggling, that I felt invisible, that I needed more of him. But he never heard me. Or maybe he heard me and did not know how to change. I do not know." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he did not interrupt. He let her talk, and the letting was its own kind of pain because it was clear that every word she spoke was landing exactly where it was aimed. "This man," Linda continued, and she did not name him, he listened. "He made me feel seen. He made me feel like I mattered, and I know how pathetic that sounds. I know that none of that justifies what I did, but you asked me why, and that is why." Ruth Thompson spoke for the first time. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of 68 years of watching marriages, of understanding how they work and how they fail. "You could have talked to my son," Ruth said. "You could have gone to counseling. You could have told him you were unhappy. You could have done 100 things that did not involve lying to this family every single day for 8 months. But you chose the easy thing, the cowardly thing." Linda looked at Ruth, and for a moment, something flickered across her face, not defiance but recognition. The recognition of someone who has been seen clearly and knows there is nothing to say in response. Steve turned to Kayla. "Kayla, I can see on your face that you knew something was going on. How long have you known?" Kayla looked up, her eyes red but steady. "About 4 months. I did not know exactly what was happening, but I heard her on the phone one night and she sounded different. happy in a way she never sounds around Dad. And then one day after school I came home early and saw her in the car in the driveway, and she was talking and laughing and crying at the same time, and when she saw me she hung up so fast. She looked at her mother. I asked you about it. You told me I was imagining things. You told me you were just talking to a friend from work. And I wanted to believe you because you are my mom, and I did not want to think that you were lying to our family. So I kept quiet. But it felt wrong. It felt wrong every single day. The pain in Kayla's voice was not the pain of a teenager dealing with a family crisis. It was the pain of someone who had been put in an impossible position by an adult who should have been protecting her, who had been made complicit in a lie and had carried that weight alone because she did not know what else to do. Linda was sobbing. I am so sorry. Kayla, I am so sorry. You should never have had to carry that. That was not fair to you. No, Kayla said, and her voice was harder than anyone expected. It was not fair. None of this is fair, not to Dad, not to Alyssa. Not to Grandma, and not to me. Steve let the moment breathe before turning back to Marcus. Marcus, I want to give you space to say whatever you need to say right now. Whatever you are feeling, however this is hitting you, I want you to express it. This is your moment. Marcus had been sitting very still throughout the conversation, his hands clasped between his knees, his eyes fixed on a point on the floor. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet but his voice was steady, the voice of a man who had spent a lifetime building things and was now watching one of them collapse. I have spent 18 years trying to be a good husband, he said. I have worked hard. I have provided for this family. I have tried to give my daughters a stable home and a good life. And I have loved this woman with everything I have. Every single day for 18 years I have chosen her. I have chosen this family. He paused, and when he continued, his voice broke, just barely, just enough for everyone to hear the fracture underneath. And she has been lying to me for 8 months. 8 months of looking me in the eye and lying. 8 months of coming home and kissing me goodnight and then sneaking out to talk to another man. 8 months of my daughters living in a house where one of them knows, and one of them does not, and their mother is letting them carry that burden instead of fixing it. He looked at Linda. You said you were lonely. You said I did not listen. Maybe that is true. Maybe I failed you in ways I did not even see, but Linda, you did not give me a chance to fix it. You did not sit me down and tell me the marriage was in trouble. You did not go to counseling. You did not fight for us. You just went and found someone else and you lied about it and you let our daughters live inside that lie. Linda was trying to speak, trying to explain, but Marcus held up his hand. I am not finished. You do not get to explain right now. Right now, I am telling you what this feels like. This feels like 18 years of believing in someone who was not who I thought she was. This feels like finding out that the foundation of everything I have built is rot. This feels like standing in front of my daughters and my mother in a room full of strangers and having to admit that I did not know my own wife. Steve Harvey nodded slowly. Marcus, what you are feeling right now is valid. Every single word of it, and I want everyone watching to understand something. This is not just about an affair. This is about betrayal. This is about a woman who made a choice every single day for 8 months to deceive the people who loved her most. An affair does not just happen. It is built, one choice at a time, one lie at a time. He turned to Linda. Linda, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Do you love Marcus? Linda looked at her husband, and for the first time in that conversation, the performance was completely gone. What was left was a woman drowning in the consequences of what she had done. Yes, she said. I love him. I have always loved him. This was never about not loving him. Then you need to understand something, Steve said, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. Love is not enough. Love without honesty is just a feeling. Love without action is just words. You loved Marcus and you still chose to betray him. You loved your daughters and you still chose to put them in an impossible position. Loving someone does not excuse the harm you have done. It just makes the harm that much more devastating. The conversation continued for another hour, painful and necessary, with Steve guiding it the way a surgeon guides a scalpel, precise and purposeful. Ruth talked about the warning signs she had seen over the years, the small shifts in Linda's behavior that had made her uncomfortable, but that she had never been able to point to specifically. Marcus talked about the ways he had failed to be present, accepting accountability for his part, without using it as an excuse for what Linda had done. Kayla talked about the burden she had been carrying, about feeling like she was protecting her father by keeping quiet and protecting her mother by not confronting her and protecting her sister by not burdening her with knowledge she was not ready for. And Alyssa, who had started the whole thing by accident, sat quietly for most of the conversation, her face stricken with guilt that was visible to everyone in the room. When Steve finally turned to her, gently, carefully, he asked her how she was feeling.